Hey viewers, it's time for another video about Starfield. This is probably going to be the last one I'll make until after the game comes out. I have a great deal to talk about because last week's showcase was over 40 minutes long. It felt like it went on forever, but in a good way. Overall, I was extremely impressed with the Starfield Direct. It was chock full of new information and definitely helped build up my hype. Unfortunately, it also came with quite a bit of bad news that we might as well get out of the way right off the bat. First, almost immediately after the showcase, Todd Howard admitted in an IGN interview that Starfield is going to be locked to 30 FPS on Xbox consoles. This admission has dominated the conversation surrounding the game for the past week, with many people being very disappointed by the news. I'm disappointed too, and the letdown is especially egregious considering Bethesda put out a trailer a few months ago that was at least partially rendered at 60 FPS. They set an expectation that they must have known they could never live up to. One reaction that I've seen from a lot of people is saying they don't care because they'll be playing it on PC at 60 FPS anyways. That idea makes me laugh. If the Xbox Series X can't deliver 60 FPS, what makes you think you'll be hitting that target on a mid-range CPU that's scarcely any faster? We'll cover PC system requirements later, don't worry, but right now, I just want to add one more thing to the 30 FPS discussion. Starfield might not actually be locked to 30 FPS on Xbox for long. Fallout 4 on Xbox had, or at least used to, I can't find it anymore, a mod called 720p 60 that dropped the rendering resolution to 1280 by 720 and removed volumetric lighting to try to achieve 60 FPS even on the original Xbox One. There were also mods that reduced grass density and removed anti-aliasing for further performance gains. I haven't seen any videos online testing these mods with actual framerate numbers, but I'd imagine that aside from the infamous Covert factory in downtown Boston, a locked 60 FPS, or at least something approaching it, was possible to achieve. With that in mind, if modders have the same capability to turn off VSync and lower the resolution in Starfield, perhaps it will be possible to hit 60 FPS in a lot of locations, especially interiors. But when you step foot into the larger cities with tons of objects and NPCs, all bets are off. I think this game is going to have some extremely demanding areas that will tank the frame rate no matter what kind of graphical concessions you make, and that's probably why Bethesda decided to lock the frame rate to 30 in the first place. We also don't know when or if modding will be available on Xbox consoles. It could take months for it to be enabled, so don't plan on playing the game with an unlocked frame rate too soon after launch. Some more bad news is there will apparently be no ground vehicles in Starfield. Aside from these static industrial machines that are used as makeshift cover, we didn't see any ground vehicles in the Direct. If they were going to be featured in the game, you'd think at least 30 seconds would be dedicated to talking about them, but there was nothing. At this point, I think we can abandon all hope. We're just going to have to travel across all these planets on foot or by jetpack. I guess when humanity left Earth, they also left behind the idea of automotive transportation. Actually, if this scene is indeed depicting a destroyed St. Louis Arch, it would be more appropriate to say any humans that didn't leave Earth were killed in some great calamity. I'm glad to see my prior prediction about the Earth being destroyed seems to be right on the money. Like I said in an earlier video, there was no way Bethesda could create a futuristic vision of Earth to any satisfactory degree, so wiping out the whole planet was the best design decision they could have made. The destruction of Earth will also help justify the very small size and low population density of Starfield settlements, so it makes perfect sense from both a narrative and technical standpoint. Here's two extremely important questions that were not answered in the Direct. How big are these planets exactly, and how are we supposed to traverse them to reach the interesting locations? On this planet map screen, we can see New Atlantis is close to an industrial outpost. How far away are these two locations on the ground, though? 500 meters away from each other? 1 kilometer away from each other? If it's much more than that, Jemison must be a massive landmass, far too large to fully explore on foot in any reasonable time frame. That is, unless we are expected to return to our ship, take off, and land elsewhere on a planet just to get around, but that seems like a horrible way to do basic navigation. In this clip, the player takes a look at a cave that's over 700 meters away, and then we instantly jump cut to being right next to it. Assuming the player can sprint at a sprightly 20 kilometers an hour indefinitely, it would take over 2 minutes to actually reach that cave on foot. Are we really expected to fast travel or hold Shift and W for several minutes to get anywhere? I really don't like this design at all. Previous Bethesda games have all been playable, albeit occasionally boring, without using fast travel. But with no ground vehicles, it feels like fast traveling using your ship is going to be basically mandatory this time around. And I'm still not convinced about the viability of Bethesda's procedural generation systems. If points of interest are all handcrafted content slapped onto a procedurally generated landscape, as the direct implies, that poses a big problem, namely, there must be a finite number of these handcrafted locations. Eventually we'll start seeing duplicates, won't we? I don't know. This proc-gen stuff is very different from anything Bethesda has done before, and they haven't explained how it works very well. I'm still skeptical, and I will be until after the game comes out and I can see how exactly all these mechanics come together in a real playthrough, not a cut-up showcase that only shows the highlights while neglecting to mention any possible caveats. Environmental storytelling was also mentioned in the Direct, but I don't see how it's possible to tell a story with copy-pasted environments that could appear on any planet. Maybe you could tell a simple story like, this was a lab run by scientists, it got taken over by space pirates, kill the pirates and collect a level reward from the surviving scientists. But such stories will have to be generic and inconsequential because they could appear anywhere or not appear at all. We did in fact get a glimpse of a Radiant quest in the showcase, and if this is the best Bethesda has to offer, it's worrying. There's a clip of this guy telling the player that dangerous creatures are harassing us, but of course, he doesn't specifically say what creatures he's talking about or where they can be found because this is a Radiant quest and those randomized details cannot be voiced. Are the settled systems really going to be full of tiny settlements that all give you the same generic fetch or kill quests? That sounds repetitive as hell. This is where I think in-depth faction mechanics could really help. Doing Radiant quests could be a way to build up your reputation with a faction, or sway a settlement towards joining your faction. An overarching narrative goal could help justify these boring quests somewhat. And maybe we will see some great factions in Starfield. The Direct definitely did a good job showing off tons of factions, both major and minor. It's good that there's going to be a lot of variety here, since a large chunk of gameplay will be spent fighting human opponents both on foot and in space. It's likewise interesting that it seems to be possible to join some of these factions. One would expect these serpent worshippers to be generic, hostile, religious zealots that can't be reasoned with, but you can choose to be a member during character creation. It also appears to be possible to join the Crimson Fleet. I've got high hopes for the faction politics in Starfield. Let's hope Bethesda doesn't let us down. It wasn't a focus point, but I did catch a glimpse of a bounty system in one clip. It seems like each faction will give you a separate bounty, like the holds in Skyrim. I doubt there will be an in-depth justice system where you can go to court, plead your case, and perhaps be found not guilty like in Daggerfall. I bet it will be just like Skyrim. You'll either spend a few days in jail or pay off the bounty. Maybe you'll also have your ship impounded and have to pay to get it back. Let's talk about combat, because that was a huge part of the showcase. I'll say in general the combat looked fast and responsive, but that could very well be a result of playing on an easier difficulty and fighting low-level enemies with an overpowered character build. I think Bethesda might be pulling a bait-and-switch move. You might find on release day that combat is not nearly as fast-paced as the showcase led you to believe. But to be more positive, animation quality is consistently good throughout the showcase, and that's something they can't really fake. They also showed off a frankly insane number of weapons. Even if we've seen literally every single weapon in the game already, there's clearly no lack of choice. We even got a few seconds of footage portraying melee weapons and unarmed character builds, which is more than I expected to see. Speaking of weapons, legendary weapons and armor will be making a return with up to 3 different legendary effects, like in Fallout 76. I have some misgivings about adding what are essentially magic enchantments to an otherwise mostly grounded science fiction setting, but I'm not too beat up about it. I understand that legendary items are a fun and rewarding game mechanic, and they fit in properly with the rest of the procedurally generated content. In this clip, we can see random critical hits will be a feature in combat. I suspect there are skills and weapon mods that will improve your chances of landing a critical hit, although I didn't see a critical chance listed anywhere in the inventory or weapon modification menu. Random criticals weren't really a thing anymore in Fallout 4, so it's interesting to see them return in Starfield. I don't think their inclusion will make a big difference for better or worse, though. Additionally, sneak attack criticals are returning, so get ready to make your overpowered stealth sniper build. While gravity does seem to affect jumping physics and shooting will knock you back in zero gravity, it still looks like all of Starfield's weapons will be hit scan. This seems like a missed opportunity to me considering how far the view distance is now. One way to make stealth sniper builds less OP would be to add bullet drop. That would make it take a tiny bit of skill to land headshots from a great distance. Projectile physics would also help differentiate the weapon types, with lasers being hit scan and bullets having drop-off. Oh well. I'm sure there will be plenty of mods to add bullet drop to the game in due time. There certainly are lots of mods like that for Fallout 4. What else to talk about? Well, ammunition, unsurprisingly, has no weight in Starfield, and probably won't until Bethesda releases a survival mode update a few months after launch. Actually, perhaps I should say mass instead of weight, since that's what the inventory screen calls it. At this point, I'm still wondering whether a planet's gravity will have any effect on the player's carrying capacity. Maybe that kind of feature was considered too annoying and didn't make it into the game in the end. There's a possibility it could also be in a future survival mode update. It also looks like weapons will only have one ammo type each, with effects like explosive or incendiary rounds being modifications that are applied to the weapon itself rather than separate ammo you can switch to, like in Fallout New Vegas. I don't like this system, but it is what it is. It's not likely going to change at this point. Something else unfortunate is it looks like there's going to be no gore or dismemberment in Starfield, merely puffs of blood when you shoot enemies. Plenty of people get blasted by buckshot or thrown into the air by explosions in this showcase, but we're not seeing limbs get torn off or bodies get turned into little chunks. I tried looking for any hint of even blood decals on characters, but came up short. For example, in this scene where a frozen guy gets slashed with a sword, there's no wound left on his body, and certainly no dismemberment. And in this murder scene on Neon, there's plenty of blood all over the bed, but the corpse itself is spotless. From what we've been shown, this game has even less gore than Skyrim. It's just blood puffs, and occasionally blood decals on the ground or walls, although the latter can be hard to notice because of the rapid camera movement in the showcase. Despite not featuring limb dismemberment, there is definitely going to be a limb damage system in Starfield, just like Fallout. When enemies get shot in the head, they say things like, "Ow, my eyes, I can't see," implying that their head is now crippled. This is accompanied by a staggering animation. There's also a perk icon that looks like a broken bone. I don't see how it could be anything other than a perk to increase your damage to limbs. Moving away from combat, one thing that's still mostly a mystery is planet traits. Gravitational anomaly is a possible trait, but what exactly it entails is unknown. If I had to hazard a guess, maybe it makes the gravity of the planet change at random, or perhaps it has something to do with these floating pieces of metal. Ecological consortium is another trait, but again, I'm not sure what its gameplay effect will be, if there is any. It's possible that some planets will have dangerous weather traits, or traits that make enemies higher level than expected. Who knows? All I can say is I hope this trait system will help make each planet feel unique, because that's something no other space simulation game of this scale has been able to do properly. Something I found very interesting in the inventory screen is item descriptions. It looks like every item has a few sentences describing its function and giving some lore tidbits. The food items look exceptionally detailed considering their tiny background elements most people wouldn't pay attention to. Starfield certainly seems to have the geometric and texture complexity one would expect from a current-gen game. Let's talk about that right now, actually. Many people are calling Starfield's graphics dated and questioning the lack of ray tracing. I'd say not adding ray tracing is a smart decision considering the AMD APUs next-gen consoles are using have extremely poor ray tracing performance. Trust me, there will be plenty of console games in the coming years that ship without ray tracing or with lackluster, tacked-on RT features. Starfield will absolutely not look graphically dated when it comes out in September, and it will probably still look good by the time the generation ends. Besides, techniques like screen space, shadows, real-time cube map reflections, and whatever probe-based global illumination Bethesda is using can deliver results that look nearly identical to ray tracing at a fraction of the performance cost. Optional ray tracing effects would be great to see on PC for those who have the hardware to support it, but I don't believe Bethesda will bother to do any more than the bare minimum when making the PC port. Now let's go over the PC requirements like I promised. In my last video on Starfield, I tried to predict what the requirements would be, and I must say, my speculation ended up being somewhat close to what Bethesda actually released a few days ago. I said the game was going to be an over 100 gigabyte install, and I was right. Apparently it's 125 gigabytes. I said the game would be basically unplayable without an SSD, and Bethesda agrees. They stated that Starfield requires an SSD. Does that mean the game will fail to launch off of a hard drive? I doubt it. But expect unbearable loading times and stuttering if you try. Unfortunately, the rest of the requirements aren't very helpful. In fact, they're pretty much useless. Bethesda has listed off minimum and recommended specs, but without telling us exactly what settings to use and what frame rate to expect with each tier, we really have no clue what hardware is necessary to run this game properly. Are the minimum specs going to deliver us 60 FPS at 1080p lowest settings? Or are we barely going to get 30 FPS at 720p lowest settings? There's a world of difference between the two. I said a quad-core CPU from a few years ago would give playable frame rates in Starfield, but Bethesda has interestingly decided to list hexa-core CPUs for both the minimum and recommended CPUs. This could mean Starfield is more multi-threaded than one might expect, and you might actually run into trouble if you're still using a quad-core processor, but we don't really know for sure. If you're upgrading your PC just for Starfield, my advice would be to not trust Bethesda's CPU requirements and instead go well beyond them. The CPUs Bethesda recommends are about on par with the Xbox Series console CPUs, perhaps 10 to 20% better at most, which means if Starfield can't come close to hitting 60 FPS on Xbox, you're not going to hit 60 FPS with console equivalent settings on their recommended CPUs. Here's my recommended CPU if you just want to play Starfield and other games. The Ryzen 7 7800X3D. It's incredibly power efficient and probably the fastest gaming CPU out there right now, at least in games that benefit from its extra level 3 cache. From what I've read, Skyrim and Fallout 4 love a larger cache, although I haven't seen any professional benchmarks since CPU reviewers unfortunately don't benchmark older games with newer processors. Anyways, I assume a lot of what's true for other Creation Engine games will still hold true for Starfield, so an X3D CPU should be a good choice. But if you also need to use productivity applications and do rendering like me, the i7-13700K could be a good option. It probably won't deliver as many frames, but it's what I will likely be upgrading to when I get the chance, and I certainly expect to get 60 FPS in Starfield with it. I'll be pissed as hell if I can't, Bethesda. When it comes to GPUs, Bethesda has set the GTX 1070 Ti as a minimum, but in reality, any DirectX 12 capable GPU will at least get you in-game. The real minimum requirements are whatever you're willing to put up with. At 640 by 480 or 800 by 600, you might barely be able to eke out 30 FPS on some integrated GPUs, but most people won't consider that an enjoyable experience. Bethesda's recommended GPUs are very strange. They recommend the RX 6800 XT or RTX 2080, but the 6800 XT is a much more powerful card than the 2080. It's at least 30 to 40% faster in rasterized performance. I can't imagine Starfield being so heavily biased in favor of Nvidia that these two cards deliver similar frame rates. The simplest explanation for the discrepancy is that these requirements are bogus. Bethesda put next to no thought into writing them. In fact, originally the requirements listed the recommended CPU as Windows 10/11. Whoops. Clearly, nobody even proofread this crap before uploading it to Steam, so don't put too much stock into it. Anyways, as much as I hate Nvidia, and I hate myself for saying this, my recommended GPU would actually be the RTX 4070 if you want to guarantee yourself a high refresh rate experience no matter how poorly optimized Starfield is. As long as Starfield supports DLSS 3 frame generation, and I really hope it does, having an RTX 4000 series card will help alleviate the heavy CPU bottleneck this game will have. When it comes to memory, I said 12GB would be enough, the Steam page says 16. I think it would be best to go with 16 because it won't cost much more and you really don't want Starfield locking up after running out of memory and swapping to the disk. That's enough about the requirements. Let me just go over a few more things rapid fire style before ending this video. Ship customization looks incredible. We got a look at it before, and I previously thought that spaceships looked a little small, but after seeing the Dumpster Fire and Optimus Prime ships, I realized just how big they can possibly be. I do wonder how customizing the interior of our ships will work. Will the interior act as a settlement, allowing us to place furniture and items however we want? That would be awesome. We'll have to wait and see, but so far I have no complaints. Space combat, likewise, is looking pretty good, especially since a lot of people worried about it being rough because Bethesda has never done anything like it before. The Direct gave us a lot of information about how space combat will work. Docking with enemy ships and stealing them looks cool. Being a space pirate and robbing traders looks cool. Again, no complaints from me. Romance is confirmed to be in the game, although from the ratings boards we know there won't be any sexual content in Starfield. Thankfully, I know a website or two that can help fix that. During the character creation segment, it was revealed that there is a commerce skill whose description heavily implies that it will be possible to run businesses in Starfield. This is exactly what I wanted to see. Like I said in my previous videos, I want an in-depth economic system that's linked to the settlement system. We also learned that settlers each have different skills that affect the development of your outposts, which is great. Once again, this is exactly what I was looking for, settlers being unique and valuable, not just interchangeable units. The Direct made much ado about how your chosen background will influence how characters treat you, but honestly, aside from being mentioned occasionally, I'm highly skeptical our choice of character background will actually have significant effects on the game. I doubt there will be unique quests available only for certain backgrounds. There are just too many choices available to make that possible. At best, maybe you'll get extra rewards or the option to skip a speech check every once in a while. That's all I'm expecting from character backgrounds, and if Bethesda delivers something better, I'll be pleasantly surprised. The cyberneticist background implies that Starfield will feature cybernetic implants, but they haven't been revealed at all in gameplay, except maybe at the very end, if this clip is actually about implants and not some magic powers given to you by the artifacts. Diseases will be a feature in Starfield, which is interesting. I'd imagine having more airborne resistance on your suit will help prevent infection. There's also a decontamination skill, which will increase your chances of recovering naturally. It's good to know we won't be saddled with a disease forever until we find antibiotics this time. At several points during the showcase, the end of the player's health bar is covered in yellow. This makes me wonder whether Bethesda wholesale copied the radiation mechanics straight from Fallout 4. I wouldn't mind if they did. I like how radiation works in Fallout 4, and I won't have any problem if the exact same system returns in Starfield. Unfortunately, I'm running out of time to make this video, so we'll have to end it here. All in all, I think Starfield is going to be a great game. Game of the Year contender for sure. There might be some bugs and technical issues, but it won't be bad enough to ruin the experience, knock on wood. Starfield will definitely be enough to hold us over until 2028 or so, when the Elder Scrolls VI Tamriel comes out. Oh, that's right, people. The next Elder Scrolls game will feature all of Tamriel, the entire continent, procedurally generated. It'll be Starfield without guns. It's going to be 16 times the size of Skyrim. It'll have path-traced lighting, a fully dynamic world. It just works. This is insider information. It's all 100% verified, accurate. You'll be able to get married in-game and have sex, things you could never do in real life. The Elder Scrolls 6 will blow your fucking mind. It'll be the game of the century, maybe even game of the millennium, if I could be so bold. And if you get the next generation version on the Xbox 720 working title, it'll even be 60 FPS. Toodles, everyone.